The Holy Gospel according to the letter to the Hebrews.
Glory to you, Lord.
It was written, "Since then, we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast to our confession. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who in every respect has been tested as we are, yet was without sin. Let us therefore approach the throne of grace with boldness, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in every time of need. Every high priest chosen from among mortals is put in charge of things pertaining to God on their behalf, to offer gifts and sacrifices for sins. And the priest is able to deal gently with the ignorant and the wayward, since he himself is subject to weakness. And because of this, the priest must offer sacrifice for his own sins as well as for those of the people. One does not presume to take on this honor, but takes it only when called by God, just as Aaron was. So also, Christ did not glorify himself in becoming a great high priest, but was appointed by the one who said to him, "You are my son. Today I have begotten you." And he also says in another place, "You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek." In the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to the one who was able to save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverent submission. Although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered. And having been made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him, having been designated by God a high priest according to the order of Melchizedek. The gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord.
Christ. You may be seated. One day last week, during that terrible heat wave, I got to spend the afternoon on the shore with some friends of mine. Or more precisely, I should say, I got to spend the afternoon chatting with my friend Laura and running after her two children, ages 4 and 1. We started off our afternoon at the beach, building up sandcastles, and then, as happens with a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, knocking them right back down again. That was going on well for us until 4-year-old Jackson decided that we need to make a lake in the sand. And so I took one of our buckets and waded down into the rolling waters of the ocean and got us some water. But after I made several trips back and forth to fill the bucket with water, Jackson decided that he needed to help me. He wanted to go into those waters of the ocean. First time he went with his mom, who told him, "Jackson, you must hold on to my hand," she warned him sternly. And he did hold on to her hand, as we usually do when we're given a new privilege for the first time. And so after a few trips of wading into the waves and successfully returning with water, I volunteered to give my friend Laura a rest and took hold of Jackson's little hand, and we waded into the water. But by now the waves had become old hat for Jackson. They weren't quite so scary as his first times in, and they hadn't hurt him, and he was a big boy. As we waded in and the waves started coming, he jumped and squealed with delight. When the water calmed down, we waded a little bit further in. But soon, there was a tug on my arm. "I want to go in further," he pleaded. "No, Jackson, this is far enough. The waves get too big for us if we go any further," I said. And so we stayed put until he pulled on my arm again, and again, and again, and again. And then I decided that since he was pulling us into the waves, it was time for us to return to sandcastle building on the shore. But as we made our way back up to the beach, Jackson wanted one more wave. And he slipped his slippery little hand out of mine and made a break for an incoming wave out in the water. I thought my heart might stop a little bit as adrenaline took over, and somehow I scooped up his little body before he was able to even touch those rolling waters that could have floated him out further than I could have caught him. "Jackson Timothy," came his mother's voice, appearing right beside us. "What did I tell you? You have to hold on to someone's hand when you go into the water. You have to do as we tell you, or the ocean will sweep you away. The waves are stronger than you are. You must obey what Kristin and I tell you to do," said his mom. "Do you understand?" said Laura to her freedom-seeking little boy. "Yes," came his mumbled and unhappy response as we turned away from the ocean to return to the safety of sandcastle building up on the land. Whether you're 4 years old, or 14 years old, or 40 years old, or 84 years old, we don't really like for other people to tell us what to do or where our boundaries are supposed to be. You might think we would grow out of this 4-year-old rebellion, but truthfully, we don't. We just give it other more adult-sounding names. Individualism, pioneer, leader, entrepreneur. Not following the rules that are set down for us can lead to success, leads to scientific and technological and creative discoveries. Not following the rules can even lead to our own self-discovery if we need to climb our way out of a box that other people have prescribed for us to live in. Not accepting how we've always done it or how it has to be has even fueled great social change and even change in the church. We Lutherans are Protestants, after all. Our very name is derived from rebellion and not following the rules. We are protesters, or Protestants, rebelling against problematic traditions and practices in the church. But what about not following the rules when it comes to our relationship with God? Is that different, or is it the same? One of the first things we learn in the church, whether growing up or as an adult, is the 10 Commandments. A list of ways to live prescribed by God that we are called to follow and to obey. But my hunch is that for most of us, the 10 Commandments are not the center of our relationship with God. Most of us probably can't even say all 10 of them at one time. Yet we heard in the letter to the Hebrew congregation this morning that Jesus in human flesh learned obedience through what he suffered in his life here on earth. And then having been made perfect or having been made whole, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him. That word obedience, its compatriot word obey. I have to be honest, they make my skin crawl just a little bit. Just hearing those words spoken out loud, that I'm supposed to obey anyone but my own self and my own wishes and desires, makes me want to do the opposite of obey. I want to rebel and shout out, no! I'm going to go my own way. I know what is right for me, as if I'm still a 4-year-old preschooler, rather than a normal, self-centered adult that I am. But before I go any further down this route of obedience, I do need to say one thing about obedience. This obedience that Jesus learned through suffering, it is not and never will be an endorsement of abuse. It is not a rationale that makes it okay to cause suffering for someone else in order to get that person to obey you. For these texts have been used in that way throughout history and in households and workplaces, and we need to make sure that it doesn't get read that way. Because actual obedience is just the opposite of abuse. It is a way through suffering, rather than causing suffering itself. Perhaps obedience to God. Perhaps the way that Jesus learned and then practiced obedience is closer to the act of trusting in one who is greater than yourself than it is to make someone do what you want them to do, or for us to ignorantly do what someone else tells us to do just because they tell us to do it. Maybe real religious obedience is recognizing that similarly to Jackson facing the heaving waves of the Atlantic Ocean, it's recognizing that we are fragile, destruction-prone, sometimes egotistical people who are loved by a God who created this world that we live in. A God who is constantly seeking good for us. A God who sympathizes and lives with us through our struggles, our temptations, our disobedience, the changes and the risks that come through life. That we are accompanied by a God who has lived a life like ours and learned that the only way to get through alive is to follow where God leads us to go. For when we let our voices get a little bit quiet and we listen for the beating of God's heart of love for us, when we gather together with a community of faith who will support us and walk with us and call us back into the path that God has set for us, then God can make a way for us when we follow God and obey Him. A way through cancer, a way through death, a way through bullying, a way through unemployment and fear and stress, and through the suffering that life will inevitably bring to our feet. And when we follow God, God will bring us out on the other side into a new resurrected life from out of what often feels like the valley of the shadow of death, if not death itself. To be able to withstand the heaving waves that crash down upon us in life, we need a hand to hold on to. We need a hand that is stronger and wiser than our own. We need a God who loves us enough to tell us when we've gotten ourselves in too deep and we've gone the wrong way. A God who lived this life and is able to sympathize with us when we run ourselves into waves too big for our overly fragile lives, and then offers us a new way of grace and mercy to see us through from the hands of a God whose own hands were crucified on a cross, so that God could hold on to us all the way into eternal life. To obey God isn't to just do what we think God wants us to do, or to do what other people tell us to do. It is to know that God is with us, and to trust that God will set a way up for us that will see us through whatever comes our way, because God will never leave us alone. I want to close today with a poem that may have started to run through your heads, but it's a poem that probably hangs in some of your kitchens, even as we speak. It's a poem that sometimes is a little too sweet and too precious for me to handle, but it also paints a picture of what life can be like when we choose to obey the ways of God, when we trust that God will find a way through the waves for us. Here is the poem. One night I dreamed I was walking along the beach with God. Many scenes from my life flashed across the sky, and in each scene I noticed footprints in the sand. Sometimes there were 2 sets of footprints, other times there were 1 set of footprints. This bothered me because I noticed that during the low periods of my life, when I was suffering from anguish, sorrow, or defeat, I could see only 1 set of footprints. So I said to God, "You promised me, God, that if I followed you, you would walk with me always. But I've noticed that during those most trying periods in my life, there have been only 1 set of footprints in the sand. Why? When I needed you most, have you not been there for me?" God replied, "The times when you have seen only 1 set of footprints in the sand, that is when I carried you."